weekend and a blessing at the DWA Church. We're thrilled to be able to open up the Word of God. We're in Deuteronomy chapter 2. We've gotten started in this chapter. That's about it. But anyway, they are traveling back to the Kadesh Barnea to make preparations to enter into the land of promise, that land that flows with milk and honey. Anyway, they come to the country of their kindred, if you will, Esau. And so God deals with them to not bother. And in fact, in verse 6, he said, you shall buy meat of them for money that you may eat. You also buy water of them for money that you may drink. And then he goes on in verse 7, chapter 2 of Deuteronomy. For the Lord thy God hath blessed thee in all the works of thy hand. He knoweth thy walking through this great wilderness these 40 years. The Lord thy God hath been with thee. Thou hast lacked nothing. It's a powerful verse. From the 15th day of the first month in which they came out of Egypt, as described, to the 10th day of the same month in which they went over Jordan into Canaan, Joshua chapter 4, verse 19, there were but 5 days wanting of complete 40 years. That's according to the calculation of a commentator by the name of Patrick. The Lord, anyway, he says here, these 40 years, the Lord thy God has been with thee. It's like we're left with our imagination as to what happened during those 40 years of time. And now we find Israel back near the place where they will be entering the promised land, because it's a period of judgment, a time of death for the doubters, and it's more of a waiting period than a marching period now, as they have wondered for the 40 years until all of the older families have died. The older leaders, I guess we should say, not families, but the fathers, the mothers. He goes on and writes in verse 8, when we passed by from our brethren, the children of Esau, which dwelt in Seir, through the way of the plain from Elath and from Ezion Gabbar, we turned and passed by the way of the wilderness of Moab. Now, although Esau, they didn't open their arms in their land for Israel to pass through freely, but yet Moses still considered them family, their brethren, and they wanted to show recognition and respect. Now, in verse 9, Moses goes on to say, the Lord said unto me, distress not the Moabites, neither contend with them in battle, for I will not give thee of their land for a possession, because I have given Ar unto the children of Lot for a possession. So here is another connection and another instruction concerning what to do with these people. Now, although the Moabites were wicked people at this time, and yet for their ancestors' sake, from whom they were descended, Lot, then they would not be bothered. Israel would not intentionally dispossess them or cause conflict with them. And then we go on in verse 10, Moses is relating what they have gone through. The Emims dwelt therein in times past, a people great and many and tall as the Anakims, which also were accounted giants as the Anakims. but the Moabites called them Emims. Now, Lot possessed their country after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. They're generally esteemed as giants, we are told. Probably they were hardy, fierce, terrible people because they were big and they could do as they pleased, so to speak. They lived like the wandering Arabs on the plunder of others in that period of time. Now, in going back to Genesis, that Lot escaped Sodom and Gomorrah along with his two daughters. His wife looked back and turned to a pillar of salt. And Lot and his two daughters finally moved to a cave area away from the city. During this period of time was when the two daughters got this idea of they were separate. They'd had no company. They had no people around them. They didn't see any men that they could marry and have children. And so they had this idea of causing Lot to get drunk, and then each one of them would go to bed with him and thus bear a child from him. And that's why we have the Moabites. That's one of the descendants, if you will. But anyway, this is all the reason that God is saying, and Moses is relating, that they're descendants of Lot. So we don't bother them. We don't bother Esau's descendants. They're far removed from where they were, and now they're not the nicest people on earth, but they're still family members. And also in verse 12, the Horims dwelt in Seir before time, but the children of Esau succeeded them when they had destroyed them from before them and dwelt in their stead, as Israel did unto the land of his possession, which the Lord gave unto them. So here is another reason given as to why they don't bother Esau. They're relatives. In verse 13, the Lord then says, now rise up, said I, Moses is talking, and get you over the brook Zered. And we went over the brook Zered. Now, in Numbers chapter 21, verse 2, this is said that here it says the brook Zered, but there in Numbers 21 and 12, it's called the valley of Zered. And Moses says, as he writes, now rise up. This was a turning point, a very important, crucial turning point in the history of Israel. Since God could enable Edom and Moab to defeat and dispossess strong enemies, it was time for Israel to move out and possess the land that God had promised them. And crossing the brook Zered marked an important and pivotal stage in their journey. So it's marked Israel's crossing from Edom to Moab, and it ended the period, that 38-year period in the wilderness, with the death now of all the men that had left Egypt above the age of 20, except Caleb and Joshua. In the space in which we came from Kadesh Barnea until we were come over the brook Zered was 38 years, until all the generation of the men of war were wasted out from among the host, as the Lord sware unto them. That's verse 14. Now, it's interesting that the reference is made here, wasted out, 38 years. That's an awesome statement, I think. Wasted years, we could call it. There used to be a song that was sung, Wasted Years. I believe my wife sung that when we traveled as a evangelist. But anyway, wasted years. What a statement. 38 years that they could have been living in the promised land. 38 years that they could have already destroyed their enemy in the promised land and succeeded them and taking their homes, their houses, and their property. 38 years. My. So we have to chew on that a little bit and think of the awesomeness of this statement. Instead, all the doubters who left Egypt above the age of 20 had prevented them 38 years ago from taking the promised land. And now they've all died in the wilderness, as Jehovah had said that they would, because of what they did. Now, this truth, this statement, well, that ought to put a bit of fear of the Lord in all of us. For we're no better than Israel, and it's possible that we could commit sin, which resulted in entering the years of wasted life because of failure of obedience. I'm thinking, I know backsliders, and I think of backsliders, some that have been backslid for years. And I've known of those who have been or were backsliders that came back to the Lord, and God mercifully accepted them and blessed them with his Spirit. And think of the years that were wasted. How many backsliders are there now in our day, wandering in a wilderness of confusion? And they could be rejoicing and growing in the work of the Lord. They could be attending our church. They could be worshiping God with us. They could be singing songs of praise unto the Lord. But instead, every day that passes by, it's waste. My. That's sad. In verse 15, for indeed the hand of the Lord was against them to destroy them from among the host until they were consumed. That's a very thought-provoking, negative statement. The hand of the Lord was against them. Against who? Against those that caused this 38-year journey in the wilderness and the dying out of all of the doubters. It wasn't an accident of nature that resulted in the death of those above the age of 20 when they left Egypt, 599,998 out of the total of 600,000 men of war that left Egypt. It was a result of the Lord's judgment upon them because of their rebellion. Now, in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 2 and 3, for unto us, the writer puts it, the gospel preached as well as unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not mixed with faith in them that heard it. For we which have believed do enter into rest. As he said, as I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. So now we are reminded by the writer of Hebrews of what took place in that wilderness. So it came to pass, verse 16 says, when all the men of war were consumed and dead from among the people, it came to pass. Now, Let me share a quote from a commentator by the name of Utley, and I quote: "This shows a balance between the love of God and the justice of God. God's purpose is not just to punish, but to help his people learn from their mistakes. Therefore, he made these people under his death sentence wander around for 38 years. But he fed them, he loved them, and he provided for them. It wasn't sudden death, but it was an untimely death. Every one of the men who came up to Kadesh Barnea, 20 years of age and up, were now dead, except Joshua and Caleb." Mr. Utley points out something that I think possibly is overlooked in reading this story, history of this year, these 38 years of wandering in the wilderness until all the murmurers, complainers were dead. Those that had stood at Kadesh Barnea and listened to the 10 spies with their negative report and shut their ears to the words of Joshua and Caleb with their positive remarks about we could take the land. They listened to the doubters. They believed the doubters, and they rose a rebellion. They raised a rebellion against Jehovah, which resulted in the Lord saying, "You're not going back to Egypt, and you're not going into the land of promise, but you're going to wander a year for every day that the spies spied out the land." But during that period of time of 38 years, they still ate manna every day. They still enjoyed the quail. They still enjoyed the sun. Or maybe I rephrase it, they enjoy the sun too, but they still enjoyed the light by night, the fire by night, and the cloud by day to lead and guide. So here shows the judgment of God, but it also shows the mercies of God, the mercies of God. All of the people, they were hindered because they had to wander with those doubters, but at the same time, judgment was not upon them. They would eventually make it to the promised land. Now, let me read some more verses. In verse 17, it's another occasion. "The Lord spake unto me, saying, Thou art to pass over through Ar, the coast of Moab, this day. And when thou comest nigh over against the children of Ammon, distress them not, nor meddle with them. For I will not give thee of the land of the children of Ammon any possession, because I have given it unto the children of Lot." So again, we come to kinfolk. When thou comest nigh over against the children of Ammon, as they did after the conquest of the king of the Amorites, Sihon. And so they're still traveling. Distress not, God says. Don't bother them. Don't bother them. Just keep on. I will not give thee of the land, as he had said about the land of Moab as well. Their descendants, their kinfolk. In verse 20, it says, "Also was accounted a land of giants. Giants dwelt therein in old time. The Ammonites called them Zamzummim, but they're giants." Rabbi Kaplan, he says, the Arabic Zamzam, so that may be the equivalent of the Greek-based barbarian, which means gibberish speaker. So it's one of those people that I guess so far removed in their own lifestyle that they weren't good talkers. Anyway, verse 21, "The people great and many and tall as the Anakims, but the Lord destroyed them before them, and they succeeded them and dwelt in their stead. Now, the Lord destroyed them. In verse 22, as he did to the children of Esau, which dwelt in Seir, when he destroyed the Horims from before them, and they succeeded them and dwelt in their stead. In verse 23, the Avims, which dwelt in Hazerim, even unto Azza, the Caphtorims, which came forth out of Caphtor, destroyed them and dwelt in their stead. So we got the Israelites, they're on their way back and coming to Kadesh Barnea to march into that land of promise. So we have this reminder. Moses is just reminding them where they've been, what they have gone through. And in verse 24, he says, rise ye up and take your journey. Pass over the river Arnon, pass over the river Arnon. In verse 25, this day will I begin to put the dread of thee and the fear of thee upon the nations that are under the whole heaven, who shall hear report of thee and shall tremble and be in anguish because of thee. So God is saying to these that are on their way and will enter the promised land, I'm going ahead of you. I'm making preparation. I'm going to bring fear into the hearts and minds of those enemies that you're going to conquer in the promised land. And if I remember, when we get to Joshua and those 3 spies that were sent go out to check on the situation in Jericho and whatever, and remember that the prostitute that took them in, and she told them that the fear that was with them, and related to what had happened even back in 40 years before that, practically, if you will, what they had been able to do. And she let them know that everybody's afraid. Everybody's afraid. So God went ahead. God knows what you're going to face tomorrow. He's already there tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. He's made preparations. If we'll live for God today, he will take care of our tomorrows. Now, Edom had refused to allow them through his land in Numbers 20. So Israel had to go around their land and didn't fight with them. So going around, it's a time to march forward. No going around now. In verse 30, it says, Sihon, king of Heshbon, would not let us pass by him. For the Lord thy God hardened his spirit and made his heart obstinate, that he might deliver him into thy hand. So God's saying, some of those kings or leaders, some of those people, I want you to pass around them. Sometimes because they're kinfolk. But here's one that's not a kinfolk, Sihon, king of Heshbon. And so he says, go on through the land. So there's some battles that are not worth fighting. And some battles we may lose. But we're not going to lose the war if we are faithful in our walk with the Lord, in our journey through this old world, in this wilderness. And the Lord said unto me, behold, I have begun to give Sihon and his land before thee, begin to possess, that thou mayest inherit the land. And then he goes on to say in verse 32, 33, that Sihon came out against us to fight, and the Lord God delivered him from us, or delivered him before us. And so there's victory in the camp. God gives us victory. There are battles we've got to fight, but if we're in the right direction, we're living the right kind of life, obeying the word of God, victory belongs to us. In fact, it says in verse 34, We took all his cities at that time and utterly destroyed the men and the women and the little ones of every city. We left none to remain. So the utter and complete destruction of the enemy, not only the men and the leaders of the people, but every person, young and old, would be destroyed, which has raised some issues of those that look back at this period of time and say, oh my, God was crude and cruel. But we need to remind ourselves again and again when we run upon situations like this, why was all of the people destroyed? Even the wives, the children, why? But if we could go back and just consider what kind of people they were. If any was left to live in that society, shall we say, while Israel came in and would affect and influence the people of Israel, then their families would be affected. The spoils of war belonged to the victors, and Israel would benefit by being a victor, not only by the fact that they would have their cattle, their oxen, their sheep, or whatever. And then God goes on to say, Moses does, from Aroer, which is by the brink of the river of Arnon, and from the city that is by the river, even unto Gilead, there was not one city too strong for us. My, the Lord our God delivered all unto us. No city too strong. These are the words of accomplishment, words of victory, not cowards that we heard from the mouth of the 10 spies 38 years before this. No, these are the conquerors. These are the victors. These are the ones that are determined to attain the country of promise. And they're going on, fighting faithfully, conquering the enemy, that idolatrous, evil group that could affect them if they are not destroyed. And then our last verse in this chapter, it says, only unto the land of the children of Ammon thou camest not, nor unto any place of the river Jabbok, nor unto the cities in the mountains, nor unto whatsoever the Lord our God forbade us. So Moses is saying, we went by directives from God. Jehovah directed us. Evidently, the cup of the Amorites had reached that point of being full, and judgment would be brought upon them. You remember way back yonder, in the Genesis account, when God met with Abraham, when he made that great covenant, when the Lord told him to prepare some animals and cut the animals and let their blood spill, and he would walk between those animals back in chapter 15. And it's there in verse 16 that God says, but in the fourth generation, they shall come hither again. And he tells them why. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. My. So it would take 400 years. I don't understand, and I don't need to understand, I guess. Why? Why can't you let it be Abraham and his property now? Why allow them or cause them to have to make their way into Egypt and spend some 215 years in Egypt under servitude to the taskmasters? Why? Well, it's God's plan, and there is a purpose and reason for all that God does, and this is the reason why they're not there in that land of promise yet, because the iniquity of the Amorites was not yet full, but now it's filling up. So victory is going to be attained. My, thank God for the promises of God and the words. God will fulfill his promise. If we will be faithful, God is faithful. And if we will be faithful to him and his will for our lives, we're going to be rewarded for it. So let's walk on, pilgrim. God bless you for joining us this evening. Our time is spent. God bless you, Brother Michael.